How long?
Well, for some analysis and reaction, I'm joined by Thomas Cole, the head of policy at People's Vote campaign. Thomas, thank you for your time. What do you make of what's unfolded this week?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Jeet, for having me on. I think what we've seen this week is, it's the Brexit saga which is continuing. People were promised in the 2016 referendum that this would be a very easy process, and 2.5 years later we're in a complete and utter mess. I don't think it surprises anybody that the government's deal, the negotiated deal on Brexit, was defeated yesterday by 230 votes, as you said in your introductory piece. I think the scale of the defeat was certainly unprecedented. And I think really now the question becomes what happens next. As far as we're concerned as a campaign, any kind of Brexit would have detrimental consequences for the United Kingdom, and where the British people who started this process in 2016, we believe that it's the British people who should be allowed to end the process as well in the form of a people's vote. Now, we concede that the British Parliament would need to legislate for that. We're not quite there yet, but the clock is ticking. There's only just over 10 weeks to go. And this deal's now been taken off the table. It's a question of what other alternatives are there which would avoid any kind of disastrous consequences, either economic or from a sovereignty point of view as well.
Is this second referendum now a strong possibility, do you think?
I think it's certainly stronger than it was a few months ago. I mean, I remember when we launched our campaign in April of last year, no one really gave us much of a chance. No one really thought we had much of a hope. But 9 months on, it's a real possibility. I think that people are waking up to the fact that all the promises which were made by the side which won the referendum in 2016 are not going to materialise. Amazing new trade deals, taking back control, the UK would suddenly be in charge of its own laws, and what they're seeing in this deal, and frankly in Brexit more generally, is complete uncertainty with the UK, in the UK's trading relationship and security relationship with its most important economic and security partner. And also the fact that, the Brexit was meant to be over very, very simply. And I think that, people on both sides of the argument, whether they voted Remain and then accepted the result, or whether they voted Leave and are now having second thoughts, people are saying, well, hang on a second, we the people, maybe we should be allowed to say at the end. So I think our chances are certainly increasing, but we're under no illusions. We're not there yet, and we still have a lot of work to do as a campaign.
There are a lot of critics of the idea of a second referendum, mainly that the people voted for Brexit in the first place, and that this would be, this would be ignoring what the people voted for. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think in any democracy, people are indeed allowed to change their minds. We had a general election in the UK in May 2015. The next general election in the UK was in June 2017. I mean, indeed, in Australia, you have general elections every 3 years, changed prime ministers an awful lot in the last few years. People are allowed to change their minds as situations do change. People are aware of new facts which they weren't aware of at the time. We're not saying that this is a second referendum. As a campaign, we have people who voted for Remain in 2016 to stay in the European Union, and we have staff members who voted to leave the European Union. What we're saying as a campaign is that the British people, should be given the chance at the end of this process to be able to make up their minds themselves, not just the 650 members of the British Parliament that we have, but the country as a whole. So it's certainly not negating the 2016 referendum. If anything, it's saying, we want more democracy. We don't just want the British Parliament to have a say. We want the British people as a whole. So it's certainly nothing anti-democratic at all. It's not a second referendum. It's a people's vote. It's a referendum to end this process. And it's not something like, well, if the British people still decide to leave the European Union, either on the deal which has now been rejected by the British Parliament, or indeed with no deal, that would be their choice. This isn't a question of, keep on having referendum until you get the decision that, quote unquote, you want to have. This is merely what we think is the fairest way of tidying up a process which has been very messy from the very beginning.
So if you had the people's vote and people decided that they do still want to leave and have Brexit, you would accept that and not go for another people's vote?
Yeah, I think of course we'd have to accept that. I think, ultimately in 2016, I campaigned to stay in the European Union. I thought that was the right decision to take. I was bitterly disappointed. And I thought, OK, well, I've got to hope for the best now. I've got to see what comes out of this. And ultimately, as we saw in the negotiations, more and more the promises which were made in 2016 were not going to be realised. There was an awful lot of uncertainty. The deal, which was then presented to Parliament in December last year, and it was meant to be voted on in December of last year, Theresa May then withdrew that agreement because she realised she wasn't going to have the numbers in Parliament, hoped that winning a little bit of time will get some kind of clarity or further information from the side of the other EU member states and indeed the European Commission. That information eventually came, but they were being very honest. You know, the UK has its red lines, the EU27 have their red lines, and at the end of the day, what people are seeing is that, you know, far from taking back control, Brexit is in a way seeing the UK losing control. It's not really in control of the situation anymore. And it's only fair to say to people, look, you know, what were you promised by the side which won? Do these promises still stack up? And if not, would you like to change your mind, yes or no? If not, fine. If yes, these are the other alternatives. And we think one of those alternatives should be staying in the European Union, where the UK has a fantastic deal at the moment. And as we know from the recent court ruling of the EU's highest court, the European Court of Justice, the UK can unilaterally revoke Article 50. It doesn't need the agreement of the other member states to do so.
OK, Thomas Cole, Head of Policy at the People's Vote campaign. Really appreciate your time. Well, moving on now, and the Prime Minister has spent